Hey guys, I know you have a lot going on this week, so we're just going to go ahead and dive right in and get started by talking about rule number 4. Our comma rule number 4 is that we need to place commas around interrupting non-essential and non-restrictive information. All these fun, again, fancy grammatical terms can be a little bit challenging. However, basically what this means is that when we're writing sentences, sometimes we have restrictive information, which is stuff the reader needs to know in order to understand the sentence. Non-restrictive information is information that gives what you've written some flavor. It makes it interesting, but it's not 100% necessary for the reader to know in order for them to get the meat of what's going on in your sentence. So let's look at some examples here. I've got a paragraph for you. So Amira checked her aquarium and, with a sigh of frustration, went to find her net. The goldfish she had bought from Walmart was already dead. The Petco goldfish, Clive, was staring at his ex-friend, probably wondering if he would share the same fate. Okay, so in this paragraph, we have a few examples of non-restrictive information. For instance, this right here is flavorful, it's interesting, but were we to remove this from the sentence would still make good sense. When information like that appears, you place commas on either side of it. Think of them almost like handles. You could lift that information out and the sentence still reads like a good sentence. Okay, so we stick it back in there because the reader wants to know, or it's helpful for the reader to know or to understand how Amira feels about this, right? It gives us a little bit more insight into her character or how she feels, even if it's not required for the function of the sentence, okay? So then here, she had bought from Walmart, okay? This information right here is what's called a restrictive clause. This information describes the goldfish. We know, if we read further on, that there are actually two goldfish here. So we have a Walmart goldfish and a Petco goldfish. If we were to remove this information from the sentence, we're going to get really confused because the goldfish was dead, the Petco goldfish, right? We have this back to back and we're like, wait a second, there's more than one goldfish? Okay, so this information right here makes it clear that we have a goldfish from Walmart and he's dead. And then we have a goldfish from Petco and he's still alive. Okay, now the Petco goldfish's name here is non-restrictive information. We could remove this information and the sentence will still make sense. We still have a distinction between the two goldfish. Okay, so we're going to place commas around it. This also, he's staring at his friend. This is non-restrictive information. We could remove the ponderings of this particular goldfish and the sentence still makes sense, okay? The Petco goldfish is staring at the other dead goldfish. Again, this adds some flavor, it adds some interest to the sentence, and it gives us a little bit more insight into the character of this goldfish, if such a thing is possible. Okay, so when you're reading through your work, it's really important to determine whether the information that you're including is necessary to the sentence or not. If it's not necessary, that doesn't mean you need to cut it. It means that you need to indicate to the reader that it's a pause, it's an aside. We're taking a short break from the essential information in the sentence to tell them something else that they might enjoy or that enhances their experience as they read. Okay, somewhat similar to this rule is number 5, which is a comma for direct address. If we are talking to somebody directly, let's say we have some dialogue going on, we are going to place a comma around their name. If their name comes first, a comma falls after it. If their name comes last, a comma is placed before it. If their name is dropped right into the middle of the sentence, we place commas around it. Why? Because if somebody is talking to somebody else, like I'm talking to you right now, if I knew your name, I could say it. It's not entirely necessary because I'm looking at you. There isn't a lot of question that I am addressing you individually. So this information is not 100% essential to the sentence. It could be removed and the sentence will still make sense. Because we are addressing that person, we're going to add a little bit more emphasis, if you want to say, around their name. We're going to pause a little bit here. We're going to, let's say we're calling that person, for instance, Garfield. Let's have lasagna for lunch. It gets their attention. But again, we could still say this and that person's still going to be clear on what we meant. Okay? This next comma rule might seem like it opposes that a little bit. We also use commas in specific dates and when we make references to city and state. Okay, so I'm going to give you, again, examples here. This almost seems like it's a little bit backwards because if we are speaking about a very particular city and state, we place a comma after the city. Oops, I left a word out here. There we go. We place a comma after the city and we place a comma after the state if the sentence continues. Also, please note that when you're writing an essay, you should never use a postal abbreviation. Write the whole word out. Okay? So again, specific city, specific state, you're going to place a comma after the city and a comma after the state. However, if you're speaking generally, you don't give us a city or you don't give us a state, you're not going to place commas around it, okay? You're not going to say, I live in Montana. Whoa, sorry about that. I live in Montana near Flathead Lake. Okay, don't do that. Not useful. If we're speaking generally, no commas. If we're being very specific, we do use commas. Okay? Similarly, if we are talking about exact dates, okay? Exact dates. December 9th, 1858 at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. If you give a particular day of a particular year, you place a comma after the day and a comma after the year. If you are speaking generally, you give us a general month and year, there's no commas there. Okay? All right, so we've walked through a whole bunch of comma rules, we've walked through a bunch of grammatical constructions, and now we're wondering, why is all of this stuff important? Why are we bothering to talk about all of this? Good writers use a technique called sentence variety. Sentence variety, okay? Sentence variety means that we are aware of what types of punctuation we're using, what types of constructions we're using, whether we're using phrases, whether we're using clauses, and we try to vary those as much as we possibly can in order to help the reader remain engaged. If we are continually writing, let's say we use a bunch of just single independent clauses back to back next to each other, or a bunch of dependent clauses just over and over and over again. Our writing begins to sound choppy, it starts to sound hackneyed, it starts to sound very formulaic, and the reader is going to lose interest no matter how interesting your topic is. So, in order to write engaging content, it is vital to use sentence variety. And the way to achieve this is to be first aware of the types of constructions available to you, and then to understand the 4 sentence types. You're going to be seeing an exercise soon in which you need to identify the types of sentences you're using. So it might be helpful to take notes here. Okay? The 4 sentence types are a simple sentence, which is just one independent clause followed by a period. A compound sentence is 2 or more independent clauses that are properly punctuated. Remember that if you don't have proper punctuation, this is a run-on. A complex sentence, which is an independent clause and at least one dependent clause. and a compound complex sentence, which is at least 2 independent clauses and at least 1 dependent clause. So I've said repeatedly throughout the course of these videos that it's vital to understand the differences between a phrase and a clause. This is a big reason why. If you are identifying the types of sentences that you're using, notice that only clauses count in determining your sentence type. Phrases don't. So if you have a bunch of phrases and say just 1 clause, it still counts as just 1 clause. Or you may just have 1 dependent clause and you may have written a sentence fragment. Okay, so let's take a look at a paragraph and practice real quick identifying what we have. So writing sentences the same way all the time makes reading a chore. Okay, writing sentences is a thing. This is our subject. This over here, remember we said in that very first video, sometimes the verb is very much removed from the subject. Okay, writing sentences makes reading a chore. This information is important for modifying writing sentences, so we understand what it is about writing sentences that makes reading a chore. But we only have 1 clause here, okay? We just have 1 clause. So this is a simple sentence, 1 independent clause. Dedicated writers try to use a variety of sentence types because, remember those signal words, dependent words, this is one of them. Because readers are more likely to enjoy the content and, in some cases, forget they are reading. Okay? Dedicated writers try to use a variety of sentence types. This is an independent clause. Writers use, okay? Because readers are likely to enjoy the content. This is a subject, this is a verb, this is a dependent clause. Remember here that we have an aside, we have non-essential information, so this doesn't count, it's a phrase. So, readers are likely to enjoy the content and forget they are reading. We don't have another subject here, so this guy here is a compound predicate. This guy, then, we have an independent clause and we have 1 dependent clause. This guy is a complex sentence. That's a little hard to see, so let me change the color really quick. Okay. If the writing is detailed, or if the writer has done well revising and editing, the reader can become more focused on the mental picture the words create than on the words themselves, and they may even reread the story or essay later. Remember the signal word. We have if. We have a subject. We have a verb. This is a dependent clause. We have if. We have a subject. We have a verb. This is another dependent clause. The reader can become more focused. This is a subject. This is a verb. This is an independent clause. They may reread the story. This is a subject. This is a verb. This is another independent clause. Okay? This has at least 2 independent clauses and it has 2 dependent clauses. This guy is a compound complex sentence. Okay? Therefore, this is just a single introductory word. He's just a phrase. Writers should take time to learn the sentence types available, and they should practice including all of those types when they write. Okay? So this is a throwaway, introductory phrase. This is a clause. This is a comma with a conjunction. This is a clause. We have 2 independent clauses, properly punctuated, and this throwaway introductory information. So this last fellow is a compound sentence. Okay? So if you practice identifying your phrases and clauses, if you pay close attention to your comma rules, and if after some practice, you are able to integrate good sentence variety into your writing, you are much more likely to engage a reader regardless of what it is you're writing about.